Hi everyone. How are you doing?
Great, how are you?
Good. So you may be wondering why I'm wearing a Flyers jersey on that day I'm supposed to be giving a speech. Well, that's because I'll be giving you the history of the Philadelphia Flyers. And you might be wondering how the Flyers got to our current mascot, Gritty. And what was going through their heads and why they would do that. Before we get to that, it's important to know how it got there, like its foundation. And the Flyers are about 50 years old, and as you can tell, I'm not 50. So what do I know? Other than watching the Flyers religiously since I was a child, I love the team so much that I frequently studied my Flyers knowledge through the internet and documentaries. Sure, it's nice to watch the team nowadays, but it was also important for me to know its origin. It's going to be difficult to discuss 50 years worth of a team's history, so I'll just trim it down to its foundation, first regular season, playoff and Stanley Cup history, and notable captains. The easiest way to go about this is to talk about how the Flyers started. According to my survey, only one of you knows who the founder of the Flyers is. His name is Ed Snyder, and he founded the team in 1967. According to an article by NHL.com called "The Life of Ed Snyder," Snyder's influence in the world of sports didn't just begin with the Flyers. Before he founded the Flyers, he was the vice president of the Philadelphia Eagles. When he found out the National Hockey League was interested in a league expansion, he pitched an idea for an NHL team in Philadelphia. Spoiler alert, the NHL would evidently choose Philadelphia as one of the 6 expansion locations for the league. The other 5 teams included the California Steels, the Los Angeles Kings, Minnesota North Stars, Pittsburgh Penguins, and the St. Louis Blues. The Flyers' name and logo virtually has stayed the same since its beginning. According to an article by sportslogos.net called Gonna Fly Now, the story behind the Philadelphia Flyers brand, the Flyers team name was actually named through a name a team contest. The contest received 11,000 different entries. Ed Snyder, however, admitted that the contest was rigged and they already decided on the name Flyers. The success of the Flyers fan base is questionable because Philadelphia at the time wasn't really a hockey town. And according to an article in 2016 by the New York Times, Philadelphia didn't even have an ice rink in the city. So they would have to build a new one, and they built one on Broad Street, and it would be called the Spectrum. Despite the lack of hockey interest in Philadelphia, that would certainly change. Now we can talk about the Flyers' first season. According to an article on NHL.com called "How the Original Flyers Roster Was Built," the Flyers obtained their players through an expansion draft, which was a draft that allows expansion teams to draft players from the teams that are already in the league. They would take turns with the other new teams to select players. The 2 notable players the Flyers picked from that was Bernie Perron and Doug Favell. They were both goaltenders, and they were both from the Boston Bruins. According to the Flyers season archives on hockeyreference.com, the Flyers' first official season was the 1967-1968 season. and they finished with a record of 31 wins, 32 losses, and 11 ties, with a total of 73 points. Points determine whether or not a team makes it to the playoffs or not. A win gives you 2 points, a loss doesn't give you anything, and a tie or an overtime loss gives you 1 point. They finished in first place in the NHL West Division, making it to the playoffs in their first season. The first postseason appearance wouldn't last long, as they would get knocked out in the first round by the St. Louis Blues in the quarterfinals, 4-3 in a best-of-7 series. Now that we've covered the foundation and the first season of the Flyers, we can transition into what they've accomplished in the postseason. According to a table showing the results of every postseason appearance for the Flyers on FlyersHistory.com, the Flyers successfully made it to the playoffs 39 times while only missing it 11 times, giving them a 78% playoff percentage. I won't be able to discuss every playoff series the Flyers have been in, but I'll mention the most memorable ones in their history. According to an article on NHL.com called A History of the Flyers in the Final, Flyers made it to the Stanley Cups 8 times. 1974, 1975, 76, 80, 85, 87, 97, and 2010. According to my survey, only 36% of you know how many Stanley Cups the Flyers actually won. The Flyers would be victorious twice in its history in back-to-back championships in 1974 and 1975. In 1974, the Flyers defeated the Boston Bruins in the final in 6 games. The Flyers weren't expected to win the series by a long shot, as the Bruins were a dangerous team to compete with. The Flyers' victory would grant them the title of being the first expansion team in the NHL's history to win a Stanley Cup. In 1975, the Flyers were taken more seriously by the league, as they had home ice advantage this year against the Buffalo Sabres. While this is true, the Flyers were still considered the underdogs in this series, as the Buffalo Sabres had a dangerous offense. The Flyers would prove the league wrong and defeat the Sabres in 6 games to take back-to-back championships. Ever since then, the Flyers haven't been able to win a Stanley Cup, and they've been criticized immensely for the drought they've been in for the past 40 years. In 1976, the Flyers threatened to become Stanley Cup champions for the 3rd consecutive year, but it wasn't meant to be, as the Montreal Canadiens absolutely dominated the Flyers, sweeping them 4-0. In 1980, the Flyers would return to the final after having an impressive 35-game unbeaten streak in the regular season. However, the New York Islanders were too much for the Flyers to handle, as they lost 4-2. In 1985, the Flyers would meet the Edmonton Oilers and lose 4-1, as the Flyers faced many injuries in that series. In 1987, the Flyers would get a rematch with the Oilers, and this time they fared a little bit better. They found themselves in a 3-1 deficit in the series, but would come back to tie the series at 3 apiece, but would lose Game 7, losing the series 4-3. In 1997, the Flyers faced the Detroit Red Wings. Despite the Flyers' talent in the Legion of Doom, which was a forward line consisting of Eric Lindros, John LeClaire, and Michael Renberg, Renberg would get hurt and would be replaced, breaking up the Doom line, and the Flyers get outmatched the Red Wings, as they would take a 4-game sweep to them. The closest they got is the 2010 Stanley Cup final, when they would lose to the Chicago Blackhawks in 6 games. Now that we're done with the Flyers' playoff history, we can talk about the captains in the Flyers' history. In hockey, there's a player in every team that is named the captain due to their leadership. The captains wear a C on their jerseys and often lead the team with strategy or inspiration. According to a list of the Flyers captains on NHL.com, the Flyers have had 18 captains so far in their history. The captains I'll be talking about today include Bobby Clark, Bill Barber, Eric Lindros, and current captain Claude Giroux. Bobby Clark was the Flyers captain from 1972 to 1979, as well as 1982 to 1984. He would lead the team to their only 2 Stanley Cups. Clark is considered by vast majority of Flyers fans to be the best player in their history, as he leads the franchise in points of 1,210. Points are the sum of goals and assists. That's not the only record he holds. He also has most regular season games played with 1,144, most playoff games with 136, and most assists in the history of 852. He would unsurprisingly make it to the Hall of Fame for the Flyers after all these accomplishments. Bill Barber was the Flyers captain from 1981 to 1983. Bill Barber was a force to be reckoned with, as he recorded at least 30 to 40 goals per year throughout his career. Bill Barber leads Flyers in all-time goals, 420 as a result of that. Eric Lindros was the Flyers captain from 1994 to 2000. Lindros would hold a record for the Flyers in points per game with 1.35 points per game. He was part of the Legion of Doom line, as I mentioned before, and would eventually suffer various concussions affecting his play for the Flyers. Finally, we'll talk about current Flyers captain Claude Giroux. Giroux has been the Flyers captain since 2013. Giroux was drafted in 2006 and would prove his effectiveness in the 2010 Stanley Cup playoffs, specifically his game-winning goal in Game 3 of the Stanley Cup against the Chicago Blackhawks. This past season, he had a career high in points with 102. In conclusion, there's much more to cover about the Flyers' history, but there isn't enough time for me to dive any deeper in it. The Flyers' foundation, first season, playoff history, and notable captains were all only 3 of the many different topics that I could have talked about in their history. Ed Snider is an important name to know if you're a big Flyers fan, and if you want to know where it all started. The Flyers' first season provides many different historical stats and facts. Their various appearances in the playoffs were all memorable and or heartbreaking for Flyers fans. Finally, the captains provide insight on the greatest names in Flyers history. Hopefully this provides some insight in areas you didn't know about the Philadelphia Flyers. Thank you.